Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Delighted to host Dr. Crystal Dozier from Wichita State University. She's Associate Professor in the Department of Anthropology. She is an anthropological archaeologist with over a decade of experience. Dr. Dozier received her PhD and Master's from Texas A&M University and her BA from the University of Chicago. Wide attention as featured by Smithsonian Magazine, National Geographic, Archaeology Magazine, and much more. Before we get started today, I just want to ask everyone that when Dr. Dozier concludes her presentation and opens it up to a Q&A for the audience, please raise your hand so that I can come to you with the microphone, and that way everyone can hear your question clearly. Without any further ado, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Crystal Dozier.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Wonderful. I'm standing on this side of the podium because I'm afraid if I go behind, you'll lose me behind the laptop. I am absolutely delighted to be here. Again, my name is Dr. Crystal Dozier. I am an associate professor and acting chair of the Department of Anthropology at Wichita State. And I am so excited to be sharing with you all a little bit of a history lesson of what Kansas was like back in 1601. So to give you a idea of what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be moving back in time to the year 1600. And what we know about this time period, we know through two sets of information. Through the archaeological record, that is the material things that past people left behind. And that is what I focus on as an archaeologist. But we're lucky enough that in this year we also have historical sources as well. And so I'm going to be talking about the historical narrative that we get through the narratives of two expeditions of Spanish conquistadors into the region, the Coronado expedition and then the Juan de Oñate expedition, which I'm going to talk the most about, which happened in the year 1601 AD. Sound like a plan? Ready to go back in time? Excellent, let's do it. So I want to situate us here on the plains. How many of y'all are Kansas natives? Most of y'all in the room. Excellent. So I think that sometimes the plains gets a bad rap. This idea that it's a monolithic area and it's all the same, right? And if you look at the ecoregions of North America, you can see why. The central and southern plains, which is right in the center of this map, takes up a large set of area, and when you look at it just in terms of that ecozone, it seems like it's a monolith of puke green, unfortunately, right? And what we do know about this overall environment is that it's one of the prime ecosystems for one of the most important resources in North America, bison, American bison, bison. And this is something that's going to come up again and again. So I put a little photo of a bison there so you can keep track how many times we have to talk about the importance of bison to this region and to the many peoples that encountered it. If, however, we look a little bit more at the physiology of the plains, it's a lot more varied than what people think. And this area that we're in Kansas covers several different ecozones, with us here in Wichita right on the border between the Flint Hills and more of this low-lying grassland. This means that these about in the plains, and the kind of resources that people would be looking for in this region would also be more diverse. So taking us back in time in 1600 AD, I'm going to also refer to this as 1600 CE. Does anyone know what AD stands for? Anno Domini. I heard it over here. Excellent. Which means year of our Lord, right? And so this form of record keeping is directly tied to Christian belief systems, right, and the Spanish accounting system. So when the Spanish and other European colonists came to North America, the year of our Lord, 1600 AD. Of course, to the many people who lived here, time system was unrelated to those events that happened in the Near East 1600 years ago. And the calendars that indigenous people of North America would not have recognized the importance of that event time ago. So archaeologists tend to go back and forth between using the years AD, and you'll also see me use the term CE. That means the Common Era, right? Which is a way of just removing it one step from that understanding of Christianity. But since most of us in this room have an idea of a time scale on that, I'm going to be still using those numbers, right? So the year is 1600 CE or AD, and North America looks dramatically different than it does today. So in the year 1600, you had limited European colonists in North America. In the northeast of what is now the United States, you had British-based colonies. You also had a Dutch-based colony in what was New Amsterdam. Does anyone know the name for that city now? New York. Excellent, you all know your history. You also have at least one Danish colony up in the northeast, but it is by far the minority of European colonizers on the continent at that time. In the year 1600, of Spain was the dominant player in the colonization of the New World. So you had a couple of French colonies in among the Great Lakes. At 1600, they had not yet traversed down the Mississippi. But the colonies of Spain were everywhere from the Caribbean, all of Florida, all of New Spain, which is what we call today Mexico, right? And starting to encroach past the Rio Grande into North America. At the same time, the Spanish were also controlling colonies on the South American continent, right? And the kind of findings and recoveries that they had seen in Mexico City, which was, the name of that city is Tenochtitlan, when it was founded by the Aztecs, had high mineral resources, right? Both in the Inca Empire in South America and the mineral resources of the Aztec Empire in what is now Mexico. And they had found silver ores along the Rio Grande in northern Mexico, but very little was known about the interior coast of North America. No one knew what the interior, they just put the crown, Spanish crown on top of it. They're like, there's something in there, but we don't know what it is, or how big it is, or who lives there, or what resources are there, right? At the same time, the California coast was also wildly underexplored. So they knew that there was a connection to the Pacific Ocean, and they knew how to get to the Atlantic, but all of the stuff in between was still very much a mystery. I'm going to take you to what we know about this region archaeologically next, right? So there are in 1600, in this period, more accurately 1400 to 1650 CE, very limited European exploration in this area of the plains. However, we know that there was a robust economy of people who were living here for at least the last 15,000 years. In the 1400s, we associate the artifacts that were recovered prior to Spanish colonization as ancestral to modern Wichita-speaking people. So you probably know, you've heard the term Wichita, right? Because we are in the city of Wichita. I'm from Wichita State University. But Wichita refers both to a language group and to a people. So the language group of Wichita is related to other Caddo languages, which is kind of like saying that French and Italian are Romance languages. There are a couple of cognates, but they're really separate languages, and they're really separate groups of people, right? And part of how we know that this is ancestral to Wichita-speaking people is through the Spanish expeditions that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. The ways here in the plains in this area of 1400 to 1650 is documented archaeologically what we call the Great Bend aspect. It talks about the Great Bend in the Arkansas or the Arkansas River. Because many of the archaeological sites in this region in central Kansas along the Arkansas River show similar kind of features. They show the same kind of pottery. To give you an idea, there's a bar there, but that pot is about a huggable size. You can wrap both arms around it, give it a nice squeeze. Lots of things to cook in there. And what we know archaeologically is mostly through archaeologists' favorite thing, trash. We are just trash pandas of the historical record. Because people generally take their nice things with them when they move. We're much more concerned about the everyday lives of people, the things that they throw away and leave behind that give us really good insight into what their daily lives are like. And we know a lot about what the daily lives of these people were like from the things they left behind. The kinds of things they left behind were stone tools, of which you can see a wide diversity of things. Everything from projectile points. At this time period, you would have darts that are thrown with an atlatl, a weighted throwing stick, as well as bow and arrow technology. And these projectile points are really finely made, and the arrow points are quite small. They're only 1 or 2 centimeters long, and they're very thin. And they have to be thin, and they have to be strong if you are going to be hunting bison with them. Bison hide is more than 1.5 inches thick. So to pierce both the hide and to get into the thin space between the ribs in order to kill a bison in a few shots, you need a very thin, very powerful, very fast arrow. And the Wichita-speaking people had perfected this kind of technology. We also see kind of tools related to bison production. Perforators or stone awls for making holes into bison hide. You see lots of drills and knives. That's what here on the bottom is a knife that is used. So while you're preparing the bison hide, removing the hair and thinning it to make into bison hide robes. You might also, our #1 artifact recovery are these, this on the bottom left. These are stone scrapers, and they're used to remove the flesh off of bison hide to make leather and hide robes. And these scrapers start out as a full almost 6 inches long, and when we recover them after they're used and broken, they're only about the size of your thumb. So we know that people are using really expensive part of this. Now, rock here stones are quality rocks. Some of them which you can find locally. This beautiful banded rock is what we call Florence chert. It occurs within outcrops of the Flint Hills. It turns this beautiful pink color when exposed to heat. The heat not only makes it turn the lovely pink color, but also hardens the rock to make it easier to flint knap and more robust in use. We also see the stone of Smoky Hill jasper. That's found in the Kansas-Nebraska borderlands. It is this beautiful brown glassy material. Lastly but not leastly, we also find this stone type called Alabates chert. It's found near Abilene, Texas. And it's a very high quality chert. It kind of looks like fatty bacon, how we identify it. And this shows us that people, the Wichita speaking people in this region, are moving throughout the plains to get these kind of resources, and we're probably trading with their neighbors in order to get these raw materials. They were also making a variety of ceramic vessels. They're really diagnostic for having these little cute handles on the side. It's currently a debate whether or not those handles are functional, that you would hang them or use them to transport, or if they were decorative. So they're pretty small and the vessel size is pretty large, an active part of the debate. What we do know, however, is that they were mostly made out of shell tempering, crushed metal shell that you add to the clay to hold it together during the firing period. There was no use of the spinning wheel for ceramics. So all of these were made by hand and then fired in an open fire. Really risky but really beautiful form of ceramic technology. Part of what I do in my research in my lab is to do residue analysis on what they were cooking in these vessels. Those kind of updates, you're going to have to wait another couple years for my graduate students to finish their theses before I can tell you that kind of information. The fossil record tells us all sorts of things, again, from their trash that we know people were eating. Bison is one of the dominant categories. We find lots of bison bone. Most of it is highly fragmented as people were extracting fat and every bit of use out of the bison. We also find, other than small pieces of bone, the most common form of bone we recover there are actually bison scapulas. So the shoulder bone of scapula that were turned into hoes, gardening hoes for growing crops. So you see that modified on the edges, they've been worn to dig the soils for agriculture. You also see rims that have notches on them that are used as musical instruments, a rasp, a little percussion instrument. You also see this kind of percussion instruments with turtle, which is the second most common kind of animal used by these folks here in Kansas. It's bison and turtles. Turtles come in their own bowl, they're highly nutritious. Your chances of getting trampled while hunting a turtle are fairly low. You can send your 8-year-old to go out and forage for dinner. It's a really great resource. Anybody here have turtle soup? I've had turtle soup, very delicious. Again, comes in its own bowl. And you can do things with shells, such as making rattles and percussion instruments. Network trade even before the Spanish got here. So they were in communication to the north, and we know that because we can look at the stone sources. We can see the kind of pottery that they're using comes from North Dakota into Iowa, so they're trading regularly with Pawnee speakers. We know that they have trade networks into the Southwest because we see Southwestern pottery, as well as obsidian. You all know what obsidian is? Dragon glass for Game of Thrones fans. A volcanic glass, which only comes as a result of volcanic explosions, which today come only from the northern Rockies, as well as sourced from New Mexico. So the indigenous people already had connections into New Mexico before Juan de Oñate brought his Spanish expedition along that same route, which we'll talk about next. We also see turquoise, very small pieces, but we do recover turquoise in this region, again indicating that there's trade back and forth between the Pueblos and the people here in Kansas. To the east, we know that they're speaking with their Caddo language cousins. We know that because we see Caddoan pottery, which is highly decorated and made in a very different form. They were probably trading for salt. So the Caddo of Arkansas, Louisiana, were known as the people of the salt, and that they're processing a lot of salt. If you're hunting a lot of bison, you need to preserve the meat for beef jerky, which is also called pemmican. So likely you see lots of exchange happening that way as well. So for a truly and that is what the Spanish recorded as well. They record these peoples as naciones, as nations of indigenous coalitions, right? Archaeologically, we find most of these things in storage pits that are after they've been used. So all of the houses decay away, but we have where people stored their materials in cache pits or storage pits. These would have been buried more than 6 feet into the ground, into the basal clay. That is what helps keep the food cool and animals and insects from getting into it. And when you're done using it as a storage pit, you've got an empty hole in the ground. You better backfill the trash that people threw in, which is often covered by a very small midden or trash mound on top. That's what we know the most is people's trash. This is a photo of what these pits look like when we excavate this. This was a trash pit we excavated partially in 2021. That is 120 centimeters below the surface, so that's already 3 feet into the ground. That you can see slightly this. Oops, no. You can see how it has this circular discoloration in the soil, right? So that's the natural soil, and then that's the edge or the top of that storage pit. That really dark impression there is where we put a core, a hollow tube down to see how far it went, and went another 3 feet into the ground. So we know that these are dug very deeply, and they contain a bunch of where the original ground surface is already buried. Now, we know that these traditional lifeways were mostly focused right around bison, but folks were also growing a variety of crops, including the Three Sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. These are called the Three Sisters because when you grow them together, you can get a complete protein, as well as the fact that when you grow them together, the plants support each other. So the corn is a tall stalk that allows the beans to grow up. The squash at the base of the planting provides shade and humidity for more water to accumulate at the base of the corn mound. This co-planting also allows for nitrogen reintroduction into the soils because beans are a nitrate fixating plant. So it's renewing the soil as well as it's growing. This ingenious form of horticulture and agriculture really sustained a variety of groups on the plains, not only Wichita-speaking people, but a variety of groups that adopt this kind of farming technology to support these communities. Bison, of course, is our nutritional powerhouse that we know was eaten fresh from the steak, was processed into pemmican. We know that it was hunted in surrounds or impoundments, and that you would have a group of people come together to hunt a group of bison. This would also allow for the mass production of bison robe hides, which were highly valued not only here in the plains, but the Aztecs were using bison hide shields to fight the Spanish conquistadors. So that bison hide had to likely come from this region of the world, and it was being traded throughout North America. And we see this locally as well. So This is another example from our local excavations here in, not here in Cali, but in Cowley County. This is the phalange, the distal end of bison. We also see what they were used to process. These are limestone boulders that were used in fire pits, but also used to actually pound the dried bison meat into pemmican. It takes on the texture of, some cultures call it jerky floss, meat floss. So you can sometimes find this in Chinese or Mexican groceries, that it takes on that pounded character. And we recover that archaeologically as well. And we find it in the base of these giant storage pits. After people had removed them all away, we see the bison bone as well as those implements. In addition to bison, we know that these folks were also hunting deer, small animals, rabbits, squirrels, small gophers. Lots of birds are also being hunted, turkey, cranes, ducks, and mallards. And again, I've already mentioned the turtles, but also right, for a variety of different resources. I love this little example that we recovered a couple of years ago. That's a little small mussel shell, and on top of it, almost like a lid, you have a piece of stone flake, like someone had just scraped out the mussel, eaten it, put it back, and thrown it away for us. Corns, beans, and squash would have been the staple horticultural, and here you can see how the as the basis of this horticultural foodway, but there was also a variety of wild plants that Wichita-speaking people would have exploited as well. Wild prairie turnips, Daucus wild carrot, you might know it under the term Queen Anne's lace. You've seen that flower along the highway, that's actually a wild carrot with an edible root. Marsh elder and cattail are also widely available and highly nutritious. Cattail, we're just now doing the nutritional studies on these wild foods, and cattail has one of the highest concentrations of folate of any plant out there. Folate is the vitamin necessary for fetus development. That is what our modern foods are fortified with, that you take in prenatal vitamins. But these ancestral Wichita people already knew how healthy it was, and modern science is now realizing how healthy these foods are. You can also get nuts and fruits, sand plums, grapes, pawpaws. Elderberries grow cultivated in this area as well. So there are a lot of really delicious options that ancestral people were developing and focused on in these foodways. And my specialty, I'm an archaeologist of food, so I can't help but tell you all the fun ways you can cook it and make it delicious that we're just now learning, both on an open fire, but also in earth ovens and lots of ways to store it as well. Now, these are the kind of things that we know archaeologically, but really we don't have as much documentation as you would expect from the historic record. Because as you might imagine, what the kind of foods these people were eating were not the top concerns of the Spanish conquistadors. So the very first European record that we have of this region comes from the Coronado expedition, which left New Spain, which is now Mexico, in the year 1540. It took a really large expedition into New Spain, what would become New Mexico, and then further into the plains by the year 1540. And there are several documents that we have from the Coronado expedition that give us an idea of their route, not the precise route, but an idea of their route and the kind of people that they encountered along the way. The Coronado expedition was a pure exploratory missionary mission. They moved north from Mexico City, coming into the Hopi and Yakima pueblos that are still occupied today. Yakima Pueblo in what is now New Mexico is the longest documented, continuously occupied settlement in North America. So that Yakima Pueblo has been occupied since at least 1200, and people are still living there today in traditional pueblos. The Coronado expedition continued. They then went east and then north, cutting through what is archaeologically, we know that they cut through the north part of Texas before looping north. They ended up spending about a month in this area of Kansas. And that is where that term Quivira comes from, that you saw my title and you saw in the advertisement of this talk, where they use the term Quivira to talk about the different nations, plural, that occupied this region. The Coronado expedition did not spend a lot of time documenting what these places are like, but they record several cities, and they use the term cities, located along the Arkansas River, that had hundreds, if not thousands, of people within these settlements, place to place, chief to chief, nation to nation. And so in the spring of 1541, somewhere in the Salina area, that's currently up to debate of how far between Salina probably to Kansas City, Kansas area did the Coronado expedition travel, because they took several months to do it. They then went home, and nobody came back for the next 60 years because it was so hard to get to. And the Juan de Oñate campaign, which was better documented in terms of what we now know of their route, didn't even go as far north as the Coronado expedition. That expedition was, I didn't want to say unsanctioned, but let's say that Juan de Oñate, who is a fascinating historical figure and also probably just a straight up not great human being, went without the explicit blessing of the Spanish crown on this expedition. The excuse that Oñate gave was that he was on the trail to fugitives who had escaped an unauthorized, a truly unauthorized expedition in the area several years prior, and he was going to rectify the situation as Viceroy of New Spain, of what was to become New Mexico, and the very failing colonies of New Mexico. Juan de Oñate was installed as governor of the region and was very harsh in his control, both of colonists and of the indigenous people. He's probably most famous for the infamous, I should say, for the 1598 massacre at Yakima Pueblo, when the Pueblo people did not respond peacefully to Oñate's requirement to live inside the colony walls. They had a small revolt. His nephew was killed, 11 soldiers were injured. Oñate responded by killing somewhere between 500 to 800 Pueblo residents, including women and children. He then enslaved all male indigenous people above the age of 18. He in the records, it actually is recorded that he wanted to cut everybody's foot off. All of the men who were going to remain as slaves to the Spanish crown, he wanted to cut their foot off, but then they would have made pretty bad slaves. So he downplayed that and he just cut off toes. So in his own letters to the Spanish crown, he refers to this incident as the culling of the toes in 1598. In this time period, in 1600, there were still some rumors of mineral resources to the north, but the Spanish had not seen very large concentrations of silver or gold like they had seen in South America. And so Oñate, in his very bad control of New Mexico, said, I'm going to go further east and I will see if I can find something that Coronado did not, right? And see if I can't convince the Spanish crown to give me more money to help my fledgling campaign. So in 1601, he took 130 soldiers, 12 priests, 130 slaves, so equal numbers of indigenous people as slaves and as guides, as there were Spanish soldiers on this expedition. 300 horses and mules to go into the interior of North America. They were led by an enslaved man who they called Miguel, who was probably born in the area here in Kansas, though taken as captive by other indigenous groups and then the Spanish as he got older. And he was used as a translator into this movement north. The exact route that the Oñate campaign took has been debated several times, and it's debated because there were no maps drawn of the expedition, save this map, which does not look like the maps that we are accustomed to reading from European sources today. There is no north direct dictated in this map. Distances are not mentioned, and it is unclear if the squiggly lines are meant to be roads or if they're meant to be rivers, connecting these circles, which appear to be place names. This was the map drawn by Miguel after the expedition had concluded, when they were back in Mexico City. Because what had happened on this expedition is they had started in New Mexico, and to feed the over 300 people as part of the expeditions, the Oñate campaign raided settlements of Plains villagers along their way, moving eastwards and northwards, which is not a great way to make friends. So by the time they made it likely into the area of which is now Kansas, they had a group of non-friendly people trailing the campaign of where they had been pillaged along the way. The Spanish called this group the Esquenchaques, and they're understood to likely be more related to Apache-speaking groups that were more nomadic. When they come outside of Wichita, into the plains, into what we think is now Kansas, they encountered a residential population on the top of the hill. And at the top of the hill, across the river, they could see several hundred individuals dressed out in regalia. And so 300 people on the hill, 150 soldiers, doesn't seem like a good way to engage. And through translators, the Oñate campaign understand that they meet a group of people who come from the settlement. They call it the Great Settlement in translation. And it's made clear that there's no interest in conflict. By this point, the people of the Great Settlement know that the Spanish have been pillaging along the way, right? So there's no interest in conflict. But the Esquenchaques that have been following the Spanish may be interested in conflict, both with the residential population of the Great Settlement and with the Spanish conquistadors. So for 3 days, Juan de Oñate sets up camp in what we think is this area of now Kansas. And in those 3 days, they send a group of just a handful of soldiers to explore this great settlement on the opposite side of the river. And the report that gets made in Mexico City in 1601 says that there were over 2,000 abandoned houses. For 3 miles, the Spanish report that they rode their horse all the way up in one day until as far as they can go, and all the way back in one day. And they never left the confines of being able to see houses. And they counted 2,000 houses, each house of which had 10 beds. And that 10,000, 2,000 houses, 10 people per bed, per house, of what they counted, that would be 20,000 is what they report. Which at that time is larger than Mexico City, is about the same size as the city of London, to give you some aspect of scale. Now, this is what they report to the Spanish government. The question is whether or not we believe this report. Because there are many reasons that the Spanish would want to, the Oñate campaign would want to exaggerate the importance of this expedition, right? Oñate was looking for more money to support his colony, and it makes more sense about why they spent 3 days and then ran home to New Mexico, saying, oh, we couldn't have possibly had, attempted against a foe so large, versus coming back empty-handed, which is what they did. They do report a small skirmish in between, not the people of the Great Settlement, but the Spanish and the Esquimaux that had followed them there. The reports there are conflicting about whether or not anyone was actually hurt, or whether or not there was just a volley of arrows, a volley of shots. Either way, it seems like it was unlikely that very many people got hurt in that skirmish. But important to document that skirmish did occur when we're looking at other sources other than the historical narrative. Now, this narrative of 1601, of the Oñate campaign, has for a long time been accepted by historians and archaeologists alike, that the people of this great settlement and Quivira that Coronado explored in 1540 are likely ancestral to Wichita-speaking people, primarily because of the large amount of tattooing that both Coronado and the Oñate campaign record. This form of tattooing was reported in the 1700s, at which time Wichita-speaking people had migrated south into Oklahoma and Texas. And by 1750, the Wichita are fighting the Texans along the Red River to maintain sovereignty. They're still using similar kind of lifeways and similar kind of artifacts and similar kinds of pottery, which is how we trace them from 1400, from what we think now, this is in the mid-16th century, right? Groups along the Red River that Coronado saw, the area that the Oñate campaign saw, which we've been calling Etzanoa recently, because the word Etzanoa is on that map drawn in 1602 by Miguel. And other groups, the Esquimaux mentioned by the Oñate campaign as well. By the time you get into the 1700s, you get French expeditions recording these Wichita peoples into Oklahoma and then further into Texas. Which, if you've been following the Etzanoa narrative, then you know that to locate this location where the Oñate campaign has happened is being more and more likely recognized to be here in Kansas, in Cowley County, at a known site called 14C03, which, when Waldo Ladle first investigated it in the 1930s and 40s, called it the Cowley Country Club site. And more modernly, we've been referring to it as Etzanoa, which is a far better name, easier to say at least, than the Cowley Country Club site. And from the time that it was first recognized archaeologically, it was recognized as the possibility of this location that the Oñate campaign describes. geographically, it's in the right place. It's got a lot of sites concentrated right at the confluence of the Arkansas and Walnut Rivers. And there are other sites along the Arkansas River Valley as well. This was also kind of confirmed or reinvigorated by the work of my colleague, Dr. Donald Blakesley, who you might have heard before, about taking a closer look at a retranslation of the documents from the Oñate campaign that match the physical description of that Arkansas River Valley, and also matches more accurately some of the sites that we're seeing as well. This is a map drawn by Susan Vayick in the 1980s, who also proposed these sites as the location of the Oñate campaign. We're getting to the point of, you've been with me 40 minutes, I appreciate your patience. Recognizing then that at the time that the Oñate and the Coronado expedition came, the Wichita, I've been using the term Wichita-speaking people because it's likely that they were not one unified nation, is that there were probably several different kingdoms or chiefdoms represented that are represented in the different bands of the Wichita today, right? And so whether or not we want to refer to this entire region of Quivira, which is the term that Coronado gave the region, or if we want to recognize it as Great Bend aspects, the term that archaeologists gave the region, or if we just want to call it ancestral Wichita, right? Either way, the new archaeological evidence that we're getting in collaboration with the historical evidence is showing that these groups of people had a really wide-ranging influence, that population densities may have been higher and may be validated more through the archaeological record that has been previously understood. So we need to use these materials together. So I've mentioned a couple times and I've shown artifacts from our excavations. I know that these are continuing, that we're still literally uncovering what we know about Wichita in 1601 today, and we're learning new things from these excavations. Wichita State has been working at these locales since 2017 under my recently retired colleague, Dr. Blakesley. I'm taking over some of these excavations, and I'm glad to announce that we will be returning to what is now our Kansas City, for continued excavations this summer. So, I hope this has given you a viewpoint of what Wichita lifeways and what this area would have looked like in 1601, and I would be happy to take any questions you may have. We'll give you a mic.
A little bit about the field school.
Sure. It's exciting, just like that noise. So, an archaeological field school is part of the standard training practice of all archaeologists in North America. So, what you should know is that some archaeologists are like me, that are academics and work in universities, but actually a vast majority of working archaeologists actually work in contractor compliance archaeology, which is prior to the construction of roads and airports and oil rigs, anything on federal land or with federal money that requires an impact survey. That requires archaeologists to go and make sure that we're not destroying things while improving our infrastructure of our nation. And so the training of these future archaeologists happen in a field school. I run an academic field school mostly for those students who are wanting to become professional archaeologists. So this is an intensive 4-week field school. We live in our city. We spend all of our day learning how to dig, identifying artifacts, learning the routine of what kind of notes to make and what the signs are of the archaeological record. We take about 20 college students, which we take from both Wichita State and from universities elsewhere to join in this expedition, and we teach them how to dig. So we've done this often in collaboration with the Exinoa Conservancy, which is a nonprofit dedicated to the preservation and promotion of the archaeology of the region, and they also host a community field school in years past, where they've particularly been interested in training K through 12 history and social science teachers in archaeology as this interdisciplinary science humanities. The field school runs 4 weeks. Anything from incoming freshmen to graduate students. We learn how to dig and have a great time doing it. Some questions in the back?
I was thinking about the archaeological digging up around Kansas City, the Quivira diggings. Is that related to any of the studies that you're doing?
Yeah, it is. So you can't go anywhere in the United States with some form of archaeology, and so you might be hearing some news out of Kansas City. Again, with the new infrastructure bills, you're going to hear more archaeological sites recovered and noted because of these kind of excavations. Now, in the Kansas City area, it is one of the earliest areas of making pottery, and probably is one of the origins of Wichita-speaking people that you see along the Arkansas. But at the same time that you see Quivira here in central Kansas, you see a slightly different kind of culture emerging in the Kansas City region. And those sites are probably more related to what are now Pawnee speakers. And so there is exchange back and forth, but they might have been speaking different language groups, and because we see they're making different pottery styles, and their arrow styles are different as well. So but we know that even continued in today, Wichita and Pawnee speakers have some dances in common, they have some ceremonies in common, and so it's likely that there was regular trade between those groups and alliances between these different nations solidified through those practices, those rituals, and those dances and the feasts that are maintained actually even into today, which is, I think, pretty remarkable and awesome.
We had another question.
Yeah.
Okay. 1491, before Columbus arrived, was this group already in that area? And if so, how did it change between when, in response to that very first group that encountered Indians further east and south, of course, but were diseases passed, and what happened?
Sure. So the very short version of this history, and the interesting part to me is that unlike other parts of North America, which have documented change from European sources on the very large changes that happened between the beginning of European colonization and the formalization of the United States in the lower 48, a lot of these changes happen before we have a lot of European documentation. So ancestral speaking Wichita speakers are here in 1491. They've been here for at least 100 years prior to Spanish. The Spanish are the first ones here. There is no European contact until 1540 in the Coronado expedition, and then no contact again into 1601. That's 60 years, which means that there's a lot of changes happening in the lower 48. By that time, even by the Oñate campaign, there are large changes happening in the depopulation of Florida. By 1700, the French have pushed a variety of indigenous people among the Great Plains further west, including the ancestors of Osage speakers which becomes a dominant group on the plains by the 1700s. You have Apache speakers, which are Athabascan languages, being pushed in from the north, so that by 1700 you have other groups pushing Wichita-speaking groups south. The Wichita are late to adapt the horse, in contrast to some of the other groups. And so their horticultural lifeway, the Three Sisters, kind of gets overtaken by horse-based economies. So they're pushed south, and then only in the 18th century are they then pushed north again, at which time the ravages of military action by the Spanish and Euro-American colonizers in combination with disease has severely decreased the population size of the people that would have been here in 1491 and of ancestral Wichita speakers. And that is what the coalition of the modern Wichita and affiliated tribes is the various Wichita speaking groups plus a couple of other non-Wichita speaking groups coalesced into the modern tribal entity that is in Anadarko, Oklahoma today. So that's the very short version. In that one in red.
Is there a museum around here where you display some of the artifacts you found?
Yeah, so you have a couple of small museum options. I have to shout out on campus, Wichita State campus, we have the Lowell D. Holmes Anthropology Museum. As part of that museum, which is currently in Neff Hall, we have a couple of exhibits on Eskimo in particular, including, I will say, for any educators in the room, we have a traveling exhibit available for loan that's designed for K through 12 classrooms, libraries, so you can take some of those artifacts to a classroom near you. There is also artifacts on display of that same time period in Ark City. The museum is called the Cherokee Land Rush Museum. Has small amounts of artifacts on display there. You'll also see artifacts from this time period in I'm sorry? Yes, exactly. The Quivira Museum in Lyons has the largest collections. Lyons, Kansas is likely the location of where the Coronado expedition stopped. It is now called the Tobias Thompson site. And so they have a lot of artifacts from this area. Rice County Historical Museum is also putting together an exhibit, as well as the McPherson Historical Museum. Those exhibits are being worked on by my colleague, the recently retired but clearly can't get out of working, Donald Blakesley, which they're hoping to open those exhibits in late fall or early spring. Or more, I think Derby also has some.
I read that you're the archaeologist for the city of Wichita, is that right?
I am.
What does that,
What does
do
that
you do?
entail? Yeah. So interestingly, the city, Wichita was the very first documented city archaeologist program, of which there are several city archaeology programs across North America. It was established in 1967 or 68. That office was first established as the compliance arm for the municipal government to provide oversight for the construction of all of the parks and the infrastructure of Wichita. So when the office was first originated, Wichita State and the city archaeologists literally went out and did test excavations prior to flood control and prior to like Chisholm Creek Park being established to meet federal and state regulations that no archaeological sites be destroyed during that. So the office did that through the early 1990s, at which time most of municipal lands had been surveyed. And then that role of the city archaeologist has become advisory. So the office has a non-voting seat on the Historic Preservation Board and the Metro Area Planning Committee, which means my office receives the agendas for development in the city, which means that I go and I look, oh, what is being developed in the city? Has a survey been conducted there before? Do we know if there are any archaeological sites near close by? That we do a screening, and then we can reach out to the developers and say, hey, there's an archaeological site a mile away. We're also available for consultations for the city. For example, we helped mitigate an archaeological survey for a project the city was working on to build a new community center. And so I took a group of students out and we conducted a survey to state and federal laws to make sure that at a much reduced cost to private firms to say, hey, you would be safe to put a community service there. The city archaeologist office is also open. If you find something in your backyard and you want a professional opinion about it, I would be more than happy to look at your rocks and let you know if they are just rocks or if there's something you should be concerned about while building a pool in your backyard. Any other questions? One more question here.
On the slide about Onate,
Yeah.
you noted he was New Spain born
Yes.
nobility. So does that mean he was born in the Americas?
Yes, he was born in Zacatecas in Mexico. So I forget if it's his mother or his wife was actually a descendant of Montezuma.
Any other questions?
Have you found any semblance of sites around Wichita area?
Yes. There are at least 25 documented archaeological sites within Wichita city limits. I'm not going to tell you where they are because I'm worried that people will go and dig them up. Which you laugh, but is actually the reality of archaeology in this region. So I showed you a large map of where we work in Arkansas City. We did a survey once on a plowed field that you can see from a major highway. We did our survey with our archaeology students on a Friday. On a Saturday, there were people trespassing on this field, looking with shovels and metal detectors that would be stealing artifacts from that landowner. So archaeologists are really protective of telling the general public where things are because it is a real and documented reality that these sites are being looted. I'll be happy, I can hang out for a little bit further before I have to get back on campus. I want to thank the Museum of World Treasures for hosting this talk today. It's so great to see so many of you all today. If you want to follow along more about the history of local archaeology, I'd recommend you follow the Department of Anthropology Facebook page. We post a variety of events. That's where you'll also see announcements concerning the field school. We also partner with the Archaeological Association of South Central Kansas, which is a mouthful. That is a group called ASK, A-A-S-C-K. They meet once a month on Wichita State campus. It's a free and open meeting, 6 p.m. the last Thursdays of the month. There's free coffee and donuts, and you see similar talks like this, but about Kansas archaeology and archaeology at large. So you all are welcome to join us there as well. Thank you all so much.
Dr. It's a real privilege to that was a really fascinating presentation about some history that I don't think most of us know a whole lot about, so that's a real treat. Thank you. And also just another reminder, October 2nd is our next Senior Wednesday here at the museum, when we have Dr. Schwaller talking about the first successful slave rebellion in Penn. Coffee with the Curator, our other lecture series, coming up on September 19th, when we will have another Wichita State lecturer, Sirena Jem-Kartanian, a lecturer in French and Arabic at Wichita State, will be talking about her native country of Lebanon, a journey through time and diversity. So we hope to see all of you there. Thanks again and have a wonderful afternoon.
You never know. You don't want to say anything.
I've gotten better.
You don't want to say anything too loud. Down something will go wrong.
That was great.
Hi. Oh, very cool.